Stone walls can be categorized by function, structure, and the level of effort that was put into them, and each of these types of categories can tell you something about the story of a particular stone wall. Sometimes the function of a wall can be ascertained easily just by looking at it. Early foundations of buildings were often made of stone. Retaining walls are built to hold back dirt, so one side of the wall will not be visible. Cattle runs are two parallel walls leading from an old barn foundation, if it's still visible, to where a field once was. These were made for leading cattle to pasture, though they may have doubled later on as roads for wheeled vehicles. Though there are many special types of stone walls, most in the Northeast functioned as property boundaries. Walls longer than a barn, about 150 feet, and freestanding were almost always boundary walls. Usually the adjacent land is clear of stone, though if the farm was abandoned early on, more stones may have come to the surface since then. Another clue that a wall was a boundary are tree lines. These are trees that landowners either planted or left standing at the border of a field, often to provide shade for cattle or just for decoration. You shouldn't mistake a nut tree for a lime tree, however. Nut trees are trees that sprouted inside the wall, often from a small mammal's nut cache. This can also happen just from seeds dropping into stone walls from nearby trees. The dimensions of a wall can also give clues to the wall's function. Walls 5 to 6 feet high and about 30 feet apart, forming a rectangle, might have been a pound for holding stray animals. Knee-high walls were usually boundary walls, and fences for pastures were often single walls, only one stone wide. If a wall was taller than waist height, there may have been a shortage of wood. Stone walls were usually not any taller than 3.5 feet, because placing a large stone above hip height requires more effort and is dangerous for the spine. Usually one only sees such height when the wall was part of a construction project, or in circumstances when wood was rare. We tend to underestimate the importance of wood fences in the 19th century because they have rotted away. But according to the only ever national census of fences, published in 1872, in Plymouth County, Massachusetts, 60% of the fences used both stone and wood. A legal fence had to be over 4 feet, so most of the stone walls used lighter materials to achieve that height. Wooden remains can sometimes be found in walls, but often they have all rotted away, leaving only empty spaces. Large gaps in walls, about 10 to 15 feet wide, may indicate barways, where wooden bars used to stretch across the gap to prevent passage. Iron remains can also occasionally be found in such contexts. Other gaps in walls may not have had any bars or gates across them. Step stiles, for example, allowed human access but excluded cattle without using wood. Walls can also be categorized by their structure and the amount of effort put into them. Most walls in the Northeast were tossed, literally made by tossing stones into a long pile. These early fieldstone walls were often the result of stones being tossed along the border or pre-existing fence because they had to be cleared from the land anyway. Once a farm was well established, early tossed walls were often rebuilt to look better. Walls were now either stacked, meaning enough effort was made to keep the stones on top of each other, or laid, where significant effort was made to arrange the stones so that they fit well together. These walls were either single walls, consisting of a single row of stones, or double walls with 2 rows of stones. Chinked walls, which are walls where the spaces have been filled in with small stones, and laid walls were common in town centers and estates, places of wealth and leisure. Especially in the early 1900s, quarried capstones were used to form the tops of these fancy walls. Well-built double walls with capstones actually have 3 lines in them. Between the 2 rows of stones that make up the wall's faces is a line of rubble fill. Other signs of extra effort are mosaic walls, where attention was paid to the colors of stones, and copestone walls, where the top row of stones stand on their edges. Walls like these were expensive to build, and usually laborers and architects were employed for such projects. When there are both very large and small stones in a wall, this suggests a significant commitment to field clearing and the possible use of livestock or technology to move the heavy stones. Marks from hooks, chains, or pry bars may be detectable. If there are huge stones high up in a wall, some mechanical device such as a roller, ramp, or crane was probably used. These kinds of walls were usually made for established farms or estates. A wall entirely made of liftable stones, on the other hand, does not require too much planning, and may indicate a lack of desire to totally clear the land or limited resources to do so. Marks on stone walls can yield more information about the tools that were used to manipulate the stones. Drill holes of varying length and about 3/4 of an inch thick probably indicate hand drilling, which was used mostly before the late 1800s. Long and regular half-hole shaped marks, almost an inch wide, are marks from pneumatic drills. All drill marks indicate that the rock was quarried, which means that the wall was a planned project. Scrapes, which are light because they scratch through the weathered patina of the stone, often result from the stone being dragged or pushed against a hard surface during wall construction. These shouldn't be confused with glacial abrasions, which are grooves and scratches that lie under the patina of the stone, or crescent marks from where stones were hit by other rocks during glaciation. Weathering is usually more intense on top of a rock, with low spots even forming where the rain collects the longest. The air-facing sides of stones usually have more weathering and more lichens covering them than the stones that face the inside of the wall, or the stones that are on the inside. The bottoms of stones can collect iron and lime precipitates. All of these clues can tell you if stones were moved or added after the wall had been up for a while. Artifacts found near or in a wall can, like tool marks, be used to establish a wall's date and circumstances of construction. Since oxen had pretty much been replaced by horses on farms by the 1870s, if you find an ox shoe near a wall, then the wall was probably built before the late 1800s. Tools from the 1700s to the early 1800s include crowbars, masons' hammers, picks, shovels for clearing the ground, and stone boats for hauling stone. Barbed wire could only have been added to a wall after its invention in 1874. Identifying the types of stone in your wall can be useful because the mix of stones in a wall can give you a sense of how much effort and money went into its construction. The fields bordering a wall are its most likely source for stones. The collection of stones available in the field is called the local mix. The bedrock mix are the stones that could potentially be obtained from the local bedrock. When the local mix is identical to the mix of stones in a wall, the stone wall was probably built mainly for clearing that field. If the wall matches the local bedrock, it's possible that the landowners quarried the stone themselves, and you could look for tool marks. If neither the local mix nor the bedrock mix match the wall, this means that some artistic and architectural choices probably went into that wall and stone was transported to the site. If the stone source is to the south of the wall, this means that it was definitely not brought to the wall's area by a glacier, as the glaciers moved from north to south. One last physical clue I'd like to mention are lichens, which can be used for estimating the amount of time that a stone has been exposed to the air. Of the three basic types, follicose, fruticose, and crustose, crustose lichen are the most closely attached to the stone surface, and because they grow slowly, they've been used to date walls. Because there is always the chance that a stone was above ground long before it was put into a wall, your results are more likely to be accurate if you measure lots of lichens across the wall. In addition, there are many factors that influence lichen growth rate, so if you want to get an estimate for your local area, you can try measuring the radii of lichen on gravestones in a nearby cemetery, and using the dates on the stones to calculate a growth rate. If you don't feel like conducting a detailed survey of lichen, you can still get an idea of age from a general observation. If none of the stones on your wall have any lichen on them, the wall was probably built within a few years ago. If there's an even scattering of lichen across the wall, then it is at least a few decades old. If the wall is almost totally covered in a coat of crustose and follicose lichens, then it is probably a century old or more. There are other ways to investigate a wall besides looking at the wall itself. Other sources, like historical documents and local knowledge, can be invaluable for figuring out a wall's history. There are many useful documents to be found in local libraries and town government offices. Any wall was probably built after the founding of the local town and the first deed of the property it sits on. You can look up the property history to see if there are any mentions of stone walls. It is also often helpful to research the people who have owned the property. Were they farmers, merchants, or wealthy estate owners? Learning about the owners of a property, their occupations, and the history of the area help put the physical clues from the wall into context. Finally, it is helpful to keep in mind the stages of development that farms in the Northeast tended to go through, and when those stages occurred in the area that you're looking at. For more detail on the types of walls that correspond with certain farm stages and time periods, see the history theme video.